So is it okay to give a Hawaiian name to a non-Hawaiian child? By the time you're watching this video, my second son will have been born, and we've decided to give him a Hawaiian name, despite neither my wife and I being native Hawaiian. Now, before some people get really upset in the comments, I would just like to explain why we did it. And maybe this video will be helpful for others who are thinking about whether or not to use a Hawaiian name for their child. I've seen this issue about Hawaiian names come up on the Hawaii subreddit page, and it's often in the context of someone who's from the mainland who loves visiting Hawaii, and they want to know if it's okay to give their soon-to-be born child a Hawaiian name, despite them not having ties to Hawaii or the native Hawaiian culture. And of course, because it's the internet, these posts and replies are anonymous. Well, not anymore. My name is Chris, and I was born and raised in Hawaii. I graduated from public school and I moved to the mainland for college for some years, and I've moved back to Hawaii and I've been here for over 10 years. And this is my YouTube channel, Hello from Hawaii, where I talk about life in Hawaii from just one local's perspective. And one part of life in Hawaii is about names. I hope that if you're thinking about giving your child a Hawaiian name and you're not Hawaiian, you'll at least hear the reasoning why we did it and the things that we considered in making this decision. And I'm aware that this is a highly sensitive topic, and I'm sure that there are people out there who at this point in the video are feeling anger and frustration, but I just ask that you watch the entire video before sharing your opinion. And since I'm a local and I know the objections that our sons may face in the future by some people, I hope that our sons can look back on this video one day, if they need to know why we gave them the names that we gave them. And I've even included a little message for them at the end of the video. And so why did we do it? Why did we give our sons Hawaiian names? Well, there are two primary reasons. Reason number one is I'm not Hawaiian, but I'm from Hawaii. And it may seem like there is no distinction to someone who isn't from Hawaii, but if you're from Hawaii, you know that there's a very big difference between someone who's Hawaiian and someone from Hawaii. I guess to get technical, someone who is native Hawaiian is of Hawaiian ancestry, as in a lineal descendant whose ancestors were natives of Hawaii prior to 1778. And someone who is from Hawaii is pretty much everyone else. They could be Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, or Caucasian. When it comes to names, typically, I think it's generally understood that Hawaiian names are best appropriate for Hawaiian children. Growing up in Hawaii, it's just one of those things that you unconsciously learn and accept. But when it came time for our first son and we were discussing names, I remember when some of the Hawaiian names came up, I just subtly tried to dismiss them. My wife would ask why, and I said, well, don't you know that only Hawaiians can have Hawaiian first names? And she said, but why? And I realized I couldn't really answer her, at least not with what I thought was a suitable response. So I just said, just cuz. But as we talked more and more about it, the reasons to use a Hawaiian name started to outgrow my fear of using a Hawaiian name, which is really what was stopping me initially. And I'll talk a little bit later about that fear. And so we settled on a Hawaiian name for my first son, and I think it fits him perfectly. I look at him now and I can't imagine using any other name for him. Now, being from Hawaii, someone who was born and raised here, I have a strong connection to Hawaii. And I'm very hesitant to say that I have a strong connection to the Aina or the land, or a strong connection to native Hawaiian culture, but I do have a strong connection to this place. I mean, both sides of my family go back at least 3 generations in Hawaii. And as far as my connection to native Hawaiian culture, I'm ashamed that it isn't better. I just don't know enough to be connected in any meaningful way. I mean, up until recently, the extent of my Hawaiian history and knowledge was what I learned back in Hawaiiana class in like 11th grade. So basically not very much. But just as an aside, over the past several months through my work, I've actually gained a better understanding of native Hawaiian values and culture from a very foundational perspective. And the people who I learned from aren't some random uncles playing ukulele at the beach. They're highly recognized members of the native Hawaiian community who are highly educated in traditional native Hawaiian customs and practices. And I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to listen and learn from them. Now, because I'm from Hawaii and I know how important names are, especially the Hawaiian names, we chose these names with great care and respect. The names weren't randomly selected or something we just saw on a sign. We really took the time to understand what they mean. And when we decided on these names, I had thought about asking some Hawaiian friends and family whether that was okay, like can we use Hawaiian names? But I decided that I didn't need to, because that person that I asked, that one person, they can't speak for everyone. And I can't expect that person to give me the affirmation and permission to do it. I mean, sure, it might make me feel better about this decision, but I know that there's gonna be people who are adamantly against it. And when they express their opinion, then what am I supposed to do? I can't just go run off and look for my Hawaiian friend to validate me. So while I'm not native Hawaiian, I identify as from Hawaii. And I feel like we honor our kids with Hawaiian names, and I hope that that connects them to where they're from, especially where I'm from, because one day they could move away, and I'm not sure how much of a connection they'll have left to Hawaii. And if people think that what we did is cultural appropriation, then I just ask that they listen to our second reason. And the second reason we chose Hawaiian names is because the names also work as Japanese names. If you didn't know, my wife is from Japan, and as we discussed names for our kids, it was important to find names that we could spell out in Japanese. And so because of that, we naturally gravitated toward some Hawaiian names because the Hawaiian alphabet and Japanese language, it kind of overlap. But what really impressed me in this whole name process was the time that my wife took to figure out how these names would be written in Japanese. Because of Japanese lettering, names can mean different things based on what characters you use. So two people can actually have the same name, but have completely different meanings. And so my wife carefully selected the kanji for the names that we chose, and they have great personal meaning to her and to me. I remember once when we had the name picked out for our first son, she went back and forth on how to write it out in Japanese, making sure to use just the right characters. And she did a great job. And it was so exciting to see her get excited about something. And so while these Hawaiian names have Hawaiian meanings, I like that these names also have Japanese meanings. You know, it's a certain duality that I think also applies to our family because it consists of someone who's from Hawaii and someone who's from Japan. Now, for those who aren't Japanese and are considering using a Hawaiian name, I don't think this reason really applies. However, I do think it's important to think of the meaning of the name, like to really understand and take the time to connect that meaning to you and your family. I'm not gonna say whether it's okay or not, because just like I can't expect someone who is Hawaiian to say yes or no, you probably shouldn't put that responsibility on some guy on the internet. But I would like to bring up some questions to consider if you're thinking about it. I think the first thing to ask is why. With a lot of things in life, intent is so important. So what is the intent of giving your child a Hawaiian name? I mean, do you feel some connection to Hawaii? Did you just hear the name and you think it sounds cool? Are you trying to trick people into thinking your child is Hawaiian? So I think it's important to really be honest with yourself as to your why. And if you choose a Hawaiian name and live in Hawaii, just know that that child may have a rough time in school. I mean, I've heard of stories of people getting bullied because they have a Hawaiian name and they aren't Hawaiian or they don't look Hawaiian. And that's a possibility for my sons too. When it comes to choosing a Hawaiian name or not, the reality is that parents can do whatever they want. I mean, it's not illegal to give a Hawaiian name to a non-Hawaiian child, but some may frown upon it and others may curse you out at just the very thought of doing that. And there may be people who, by me sharing this, will lose all respect for me. And I'm sorry that they feel that way. But boys, if you encounter people who try to bully you or harass you about your name, first of all, you can always come and talk to us about it. I mean, I'll probably have to rewatch this video to get inspired on what to say, but just come over and talk to us. There's no shame in getting bullied. I mean, it can happen to anybody. You can't really control that. But there is shame in not speaking up about it, so speak up about it. So at least tell one adult. And of course, you can always come to us. The second thing is, please don't feel embarrassed about your name. It was chosen for a reason, and those reasons are important to us. You can always come to us and ask why, and we'll tell you what your name means. And of course, I'll probably tell you about how I'm so proud of your mom because she worked so hard to get your names right. And lastly, some people are just angry. And it's really too bad because we live in one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. That's where you're from, this is where I'm from. See, the thing is, our culture here, and I'm talking specifically about our Hawaii culture here, is supposed to be built on aloha, which is acceptance, generosity, and friendliness. And even if people don't treat you that way, with aloha, with respect, it doesn't mean that you go out and you do that to other people, okay? This is my understanding of aloha, and this is what I want you guys to learn. Aloha is not conditional. You don't just give it because you get it, and you don't get it just because you give it. So just know that there's a reason why we gave you the names that we gave you. But if anything happens because of your names, you just look out for each other, okay?